First thing I did after the first big chunk of money hit my bank account is I took a screenshot and I went back to work. One unit in the agency, this is one more unit, and they were like, he drew us and said you could be part of this, and we're like, ऐसे भी होता है. And you respectfully disagree, but you commit. There were many times there were calls we took which we all didn't agree with. We disagree, but I'm committing to it. Because engineering at some point restrains you within boxes in the way it's taught in many places. And what I constantly felt was that what I wanted to do was beyond what was the structure. Best podcast I have done as on the guest side.
Welcome to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host Jivraj, and today I'm very excited to be welcoming Varun Duggirala on the podcast. I've been personally fascinated by his story for a very, very long time. He's been a founder who's built a very successful company called The Glitch, and he's now building his new company. He's been one of my favorite podcasters across the globe, and definitely my favorite podcaster in the country. Very excited to be hosting you, Varun. Thank you.
I'm happy we're doing this. We've been talking about this for a bit, and I'm happy we could finally make this happen.
Yeah, no, I mean every bit of what I said. I've just been very fascinated by your process, how you bring yourself onto every conversation, and what I've heard about you from so many other people. So I'm hoping that we can discover much of it through this conversation. One thing that I want to start off with, and this is a bit abstract, but I'd love to understand. This is the Stanford essay question, which is what matters to you and why. I'd love to begin on that note and then go deeper.
What matters to me and why? I feel that's evolved over time. If you ask me this question, I would say when I was in my early 30s, I would have given a very different answer because that time I was neck deep into building and growing Glitch. But I feel what matters to me today is, I would say, a few things. One of them is to really be able to share what I've learned at scale and what I'm learning at scale. And that actually matters to me the most because I feel I get the most amount of, you get this feeling of purpose. I get that purpose feeling from that. The second thing is that there's genuine focus on balance in my life. Right? It's something I've worked towards over the last 5-7 years. Something I feel I've kind of earned because of, I would say, the hustle of the 20s and the 30s. And I always want to make sure that balance is there. So I would say those two would primarily be my response.
Sure. No, that's super helpful. Define balance for us. What does balance mean for you?
So, okay. Here is how the world defines balance most times, and the problem with it. Everyone believes balance is about, okay, you're going to have work-life balance and things are going to be even. But it's never even. It's like a seesaw. Yeah. You're going up and down. It's always moving around that way. And it's never like a two-sided thing. There are multiple sides to it. Right? If you look at anyone's life, there is work, there is life, which is your friends, family, etc. There is your health or yourself. And the last one is that any form of purpose that you have, something that you really want to work towards or your passion. And these four are constantly in this weird like seesaw of sorts. And for me, that's what balance is. How do you figure a way that you are doing right by all in the long term? You'll never be able to do right by all in the short term because at most times you're going to have scenarios of, like, okay, I have to really double down on work right now, really go deep into it. So all the other stuff kind of gets less focus. But in the long term, have I done right by everyone? And now I look at my days and my weeks that way saying, in my week, have I kind of given all of them their due? Have I given all of them what they need to do? And I feel that's the best way to look at balance. You can't define it by, we're not machines. So you can't break it down by saying, this is exact. This is what my schedule is. This is what it'll go by. Because life will always have other plans for you. So it's always about that weird balancing act.
Sure. Got it. But just very quickly double clicking, I think a lot of people who've achieved outlier success, and by that I mean maybe the Brian Chesky, Kunal Shahs of the world, will claim that if you want to get to their point, you probably have to make a certain set of trade-offs, right? Which means that balance may have to be sacrificed. Yeah. And then the other way to live life is, let's say, a well-rounded, happy life, which could mean that you can prioritize things that are important to you alongside work being one of the components that you excel at, which is also a great life, but a well-rounded one. Do you think of these two buckets as mutually exclusive? What do you think about this?
So any choice you make in your life, there is a price you pay for it.
Sure.
If you decide to say, no, one thing, I want to be a social person, I want to be out there, I want to network all the time, there's a price you pay that you might not spend as much time at home. Sure. But if you choose to be the person who spends as much time at home, you might not get to network and you don't get to leverage that fact as well. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. They are constant choices you're making. Okay. You are never making that choice as a constant. It's not like you're always out and about, right? Sure. Yeah, you want to still be at home. What I've learned over time, because I've veered in all directions, right? I was an extremely social person, always out and about, always talking about work. I would say even till my late 20s, early 30s. And at some point of time, there was the realization that that can't be my constant. And I swung back in the opposite direction. And over the years, I've actually realized that there is a way to do both. It's just that, it's almost like a question you need to ask yourself. You need to ask yourself a question saying, is this essential? And most times, a lot of these things aren't essential. Even you being at home every evening might not be essential. Your family might be like, it's okay, we see your face every day. One day, if you're away, no one's going to say anything. Or you might be going for this event, which you feel is really important. And you go there and you're like, you know it. You enter a place, you've taken the effort to go there and you're like, yeah, it doesn't make sense. Why did I waste my time here? I could have just gotten a good night's sleep and I would have woken up fresh for work tomorrow morning. So you have to constantly ask yourself, is this essential? And if you paid that price, you got to make sure that the next time you need to be doubly sure that's a price you want to pay again. And it's actually a metric which I work on. I learned this from my coach, and I do this with a bunch of the people I coach as well. I constantly make us sit down and question saying every choice you're making, especially with how you use your time, what you focus on, what areas you are really diving deep into, saying what are the prices you have to pay to achieve all those things. Let's put that up front and realize those, and only then or rather should you build in, because otherwise you'll have resentment, you'll have like, oh, I wish I had done this. You'll have all those things coming into your head. But if you put it on paper and it's there in front of you, it's on your Google sheet, you're like, okay, I knew this is a price I'd have to pay. I can't have biryani every day. I'll have it once a week.
Oh, that's very fascinating. I think completely relate. And I think this is a question I've been trying to answer for myself, which is that if these are two separate buckets, which do you choose, if at all you get to choose? Because I think sometimes things are in motion, right? So you end up just choosing something in the moment. And when that becomes a couple of years and a decade, people don't realize. Yeah. And I think that's where being intentional about it perhaps helps. Yeah. Interesting. This has been a very abrupt start to the pod. But maybe as we dive deeper, I'd love to also understand a set of your values, right? One thing that distinctly stood out as I was researching in and as I've followed you over the years is that you're very intentional about what you want to bring to the table. And it stems, in my hunch, from a place of knowing what your values are, what you want to do. Talk to us about some of those.
It's great that sort shows, because I didn't know what my values were. I still sometimes move them around a little bit. But I feel at some point of time, I sat down and said, what is really important to me? Because I have a tendency to say yes to too many things. And it's a reflexive action, right? I'm always been a people pleaser. I've had to really fight and learn how to say no, how to say this is something I will do, won't do. These are the boundaries that I've kind of built. And in India, we don't have boundaries. Anybody who says in India we have boundaries, we don't. It's not natural to us. As culture, we don't have this concept. So you have to build it in a way that also doesn't suddenly seem like, who is this guy? Why is he like this? But when I look at the core pieces which I focus on today, even compared to how it was pre-COVID, for me, I feel the period of 2020, 2021 were years where I really looked at life on so many metrics. I think a majority of people did. Yeah. Like if I look at the period of time before that, I was very clear that I was in a long-term corporate haul. I didn't have another startup in me. I didn't want to go 0 to 1 or even like 1 to 10. I was set, right? I could, be part of a conglomerate, be in the corporate space. I'd been in that space for about 5 odd years. I'm like, I can do this. And I was enjoying it. But I got the niggle of the fact that it was because I was comfortable. It was not necessarily because I enjoyed it as much as I did. And you sometimes need that little nudge to sit down and say, 1 second, what do I really value? And I feel for me, what I've always valued is that I hate being put in a box. I need to be this really confusing person for everybody around saying, what does this guy actually do? What does he focus on? It's always been a problem for the family to figure out what I do. Still is. What do you do now? Then it's almost like, no, I do these things. Like, how do they all come together? It adds up. And I also realized that for me to be able to constantly create, and it could be creating content, it could be creating businesses, it could be creating value, or just working with other people. I need to be in this endless cycle of creation, because that's what drives me. I was sitting in, I think it was, I forgot his coaching or it was therapy. I think it was therapy, where my therapist actually sat down and said that you realize why you create content. And I'm like, why do you think I create? Because you enjoy the process more than the payoff. And I'm like, that's actually true. Because I am that person who will walk around the house and be putting like a phone in different places. I get excited when I see a new mic or a new camera. But I'm equally more excited when I see like, okay, when this is what you can do with GPT, or this is what you can do with this new tool to create content. And my team is half the time like, I'm this enthu person constantly finding newer things to do.
Yeah.
And so I do curtail that sometimes. But I feel that's my core value. My core value is to constantly create and to constantly learn and create more. And as long as that cycle continues, everything else in my life adds up, because the energy levels are great. You're feeling great. Everyone around me feels like the energy is right, and the other stuff adds up. And that's how I would broadly put it.
Got it. So to create, awesome. But this was not always the case. And let's maybe take back time, right? Let's go down memory lane. And this is a great segue to understand the founder in you. But you were not a part of the media sort of world, right? Media and entertainment was alien. You were from a smallish town. Talk to us about what were these, I don't know, moments of reflection or moments of huge impact that made you realize that, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to chase. And then you made it happen.
So, quick flashback, come from then a small town, now small city called Kakinada, coastal Andhra Pradesh. Half my family are doctors, half of them were engineers. Very typical gulti boy, as they call Telugu people. Weirdly, only call us that outside of Andhra, not necessarily in Andhra. Went to the standard route of, okay, let's go do engineering. So I did my 11th and 12th in Bangalore, did my engineering there. Hated my entire engineering, stint, because I was unhappy. I mean, I was a person who loved to code, who stopped coding after I joined engineering because I just hated the process of it. I was also doing mechanical engineering, which didn't help. Did a lot of side hustles. I mean, I worked as a promoter for a bunch of liquor companies. I worked as a call center executive for AOL cancellations.
And all of this happened because you were bored of the academics?
I felt that engineering at some point restrains you within boxes in the way it's taught in many places. And what I constantly felt was that what I wanted to do was beyond what was a structure. And I felt restrained. My side hustles happened because somebody said, this is what I'm doing. Do you want to do this too? I'm like, how much money will I make? Make this much money. And it's also an opportunity cost, right? Or rather, opportunity, what you get from it. So I was a promoter for Jack Daniel's whiskey. I would be in bars in Bangalore and someone would come in, I'd give them 2 dice. And I'd say, if you order a Jack Daniel's, you get a 3, 4 or a 7, you win something. And most times what they won, which was either a t-shirt or a Parker pen, which had the Jack Daniel's logo on it, would be worth, I would say, a lot less than the drink they were buying, because they had to buy a Jack Daniel's at that time. Also, imagine someone buy like a $250, $300 plus taxes. But what I got out of that is I would do this 3 hours a day. I was making $1,000 an hour. And this is when I was in college. Like, I'm 41 now. This is like back when I was like, 23, 24. And I also got to know the bouncers, the bartenders. I got to understand how that functions. And I was never in one bar. I would constantly move from bar to bar to bar. So by the end of 3 odd months, 6 months, I forget how long that was, I got to know how bars function. I got to know people there. I could get my friends in. I could, there was so many pluses to that beyond the money I made, but I just enjoyed it. We also very interestingly have a test every 2 months, where they would test us on general trivia of Jack Daniel's, which we had to prepare for. I don't remember half of it. I still remember some of it. The call center happened because I was flunking through engineering as well. And so I had to figure some way to sustain while I was still giving papers. So I started to work for the call center, and I was doing like the worst shift possible, 2 a.m. to 9 a.m. in the morning. And I was talking to people across America who wanted to cancel their internet connections. Learned a lot about sales there, because you literally talking to so many different consumers with so many different diverse problems. And really, how do you sell to them? How do you sell to different ethnicities? How do you sell to different mindsets? But it really killed my health. Like, I was just in a very, very bad state of health, and I always wanted to work in the media, because for the only reason that I would only watch MTV and nothing else. And I really wanted to work for MTV. I think that was my only point of I want to work in the media. And my mother happened to send me, an application to a media school saying, "Do you want to apply?" So I quit my job, gave that exam, didn't actually give it in the best way, but I got through. And then the cycle started. Okay, got into media school, joined as public relations, moved to filmmaking, and then actually worked for MTV. I interned at MTV, went and worked at MTV my early stint. And that's how I kind of got into it. I got into it through the fact that I got into a media school. But it was what I was most fascinated by. I didn't think I would enjoy it as much, but I still use what I learned at MTV and then Channel V, where I worked at as well, till today. Because content, the way it's made today, is literally what those two channels did. It's just on the internet.
Yeah. Very, very fascinating. I think these host of experiences, maybe in hindsight, you could also say that a lot of your, personality today and the sales and saying yes led to these diverse things that you're now curious about, and like a bunch of things that you now do. Was it evident when you were doing these abrupt things? Because you could say also in hindsight, like, let's say outcome aside, you could say an engineer who's doing odd jobs and joins media school is probably not the best career trajectory, right?
Not at all.
So what was the, like, in the moment Varun saying, what was that like?
So in hindsight, and I sometimes think about this, I was a terrible director. Thankfully never directed. I was a very good producer.
Okay.
And the term producer is not understood. I think it's more understood today, but it wasn't understood then.
Okay.
I remember when I first joined MTV as well, they had explained to me what a producer does versus what production does. And it's basically the person who's running operations. So you are holding everyone together in a project, right? You are making sure that the money is taken care of in terms of the budgeting. You're working with production on that. You're working with the crew to make sure everything's happening there. You're working with the director, the writer, the talent. You're holding it all together. You are COO for a project. And that's what I learned, because I was doing large scale reality TV. And because I knew how to talk to people, because I'd spend time, and I generally have always been this person. I can, you can wake me up at 3 a.m. and say, talk to someone, I can talk to someone. Maybe that's why I did the call center job so well, because it's literally middle of the night. But I've always been that, from the time I was a kid, I've been that person. So for me, it was like, let me talk to people, figure out what they need, how to make all of this work. And because we worked in places like MTV and Channel V, which had very low budgets, but had to show scale, had to show a lot of like sort of fun on screen, you are constantly jugaad. You are figuring stuff out. Like, I have done a shoot where we have recreated an airport in one random rundown hotel here in Bombay, which nobody will realize is not an airport, right? But shoestring budgets, figure stuff out, carry your own equipment, do that stuff. So I feel a lot of that is what I've always carried with me, is that I've never understood scale for scale's sake. For me, scale has to deliver value. If it doesn't deliver value, you don't have to do scale. And that's what I really learned doing that stint. I think, and also thankfully, places like MTV and Channel V at that time were places where you could come in without the need for legacy, right? You didn't go from assistant to go through that. You would literally be an intern, and maybe in a month you were handed a camera or handed a shoot, saying just go do that and come back, because they didn't have that many people to do it. So just let you try, and you learn stuff. And like, I lived in that office for my entire internship. I think my internship at MTV, I was there for about 3.5 months. They had bunk beds. Thankfully, I had a sleeping bag. They had a shower. I pack my clothes, go there, go back home once every 10 days. I was crashing in a friend's living room for the entire stint. But it's just that I got to learn so much on just how to put so many pieces together. And as I went on to produce larger and larger shows, that became even more important. Like, what do you do when money hasn't come in? You still need to deliver. It's not my channel, it's somebody else's channel. It's not like, but it's my show. So I have to figure a way to make a shoot happen by convincing someone that no, the channel is transferring money. There's an issue with the money being transferred. Ho jayega, but you're in Kerala in one random hotel and that guy has to be given money. You learn negotiation. You learn how to deal with like 100-member crew and all their issues. The only person they'll come to is you.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like running a startup.
Yeah. That's super interesting. I think so much of what you're saying, like these experiences, have been hopefully incredible in shaping your career trajectory, and it shows. But no, I think the effort is to just dive deeper into your mind and how you sort of function, right? So maybe let's take a couple of steps further. Talk to us about how Glitch came together, right? From being this enthusiastic person who wants to break into media, you go on to now start an agency, which you know little about, but that happens. How does that take shape?
So we were not an agency. We weren't even a company technically.
Okay.
So Rohit, who's my best friend and was my roommate, so he and I, that living room I spoke of where we crashed, he and I would crash in that living room because a friend of ours, his parents had moved out of the city and they had an apartment. So he'd got the bedroom because it was his apartment and we would sleep in the living room. And so we didn't have to pay rent, which is amazing in Bombay when you're earning like 12 grand a month in salary, like perfect, no rent. So he and I, he joined Channel V when I joined MTV. I moved from MTV to Channel V and I ended up producing a bunch of shows for them. And at some point, music television was going through this shift. That was where all the cool happened when I was younger. But they slowly saw this tension of budgets kept getting lower and the need kept going, we're not connecting to the youth anymore.
Yeah.
And so they made this switch where saying music television will not play music anymore, which is the most random thing you can ever hear, right? They said we're going to become a youth general entertainment channel, which even till date I don't understand as a term. But that's what they decided to be, which means they were going to do fiction serials, they were going to do all that stuff. And we were like, where's the fun stuff happening? I think it's happening online. So, I mean, that's why we're doing this. So, Rohit and I were like, should we just go do that? And he was a director. He directed promos for them. And so I was large scale shows. He was promos and ads for them. He knew graphics. We could both edit. I knew how to do logistics. So like, I will just, you direct, I'll produce. We'll figure what we can do. That was the business plan. There was no business plan. We spent 6 months thinking of the name and maybe 1 month trying to find a project. We had one project when we quit. We realized the value of, or rather we understood what advances were afterwards because we didn't get paid our advance before the shoot, but still had to manage the shoot. So, and when the shoot got over, between him and I, we had $1,500. And thankfully advance check cleared in about 3 days post that, so we managed. And Glitch was a production house for the web in 2009.
Okay.
The concept of which didn't exist because the web itself was so fresh. Like we had to go to clients and say, you have to make a video for Facebook, and they're like, isn't Facebook free? That is literally the response we would get. But because we were, I mean, that's I don't think bootstrapped is even the term, right? It's two people in an apartment.
Yeah.
Our first intern hired himself because he wrote to us from the same college we were in and said that, can I kind of come in and intern with you all? We're like, haan, aajao. So he came to our house and he's like, where's the office? And this is the office, sleep on the couch here and you can work. And what we started doing is we started going to companies and largely channels, right? Our first set of clients were Disney, Star, MTV. Because we came from television, we knew people who were in a channel that would give the smallest of jobs. We would do promos for like DVDs, which they were trying to sell, or some show that was coming out. But we always push for, can we do this also? Like add a digital angle to it, add some form of innovation to it, which is something which he and I always had a bit of a kida for. Like let's add something to it.
And this which year?
2009, 2010, very early internet. We weren't even not even 3G yet. It was still 2G world, right? Forget 4G, and 3G, I remember when it came out was the big thing and no video ran. on the phone. So we were selling that, but thankfully we found people who wanted to do fun stuff, and we would constantly go and pitch things and then figure out how to do them. So we were so we became a video innovation company, where we would come to us, okay, these guys come up with innovative ideas. So we would do stuff in 3D. We would we slowly started doing installations. So you want to get someone into your storefront, we'll set up an installation, and someone tweets something, then something would fire, and a tweet would happen in the digital world. So connecting physical to digital, and all because we thought they would be fun ideas to do. And around the time we became about 10, 15 or 20 people, we were asked if we would also do the agency work. We had no idea what that meant. We said, how tough can it be? We started to do that as well. And that team started to evolve. Again, first set of clients were again movies, smaller campaigns, etc. And around that time, Pooja joined the business. Pooja came from an understanding of the space. She'd been in Unilever, JWT. She was very senior at Femina. She was leading marketing for them. And she came in and said, the opportunity on what you guys do is so much bigger, because if you build the structure around the agency part of it, then we can really kind of grow this. So we didn't have a CEO. So I was left brain, Rohit was right brain. Those were our designations. So Pooja came in as our head of client relationships. She quickly grew to become our first CEO, and till the time we exited, she was our only CEO. And by then we had already built a team which did a bunch of things. So our production work had increased. We were doing large scale shows. We were doing a lot of content. We were doing all of that stuff. We were still doing stuff for movies, but our brand work slowly started to increase. And at some point midway through that part, we realized that we were trying to build 3 companies within one. And we had to take a call, and we chose actually the brand part. And we stopped doing movies and we stopped doing TV production, which is what was our bread and butter till then, what was driving cash flow. And said, let's focus on this because this is the future. And as soon as we focused on that one thing, that's when it really blew up for us. And it became like, I feel we grew so much in I would say the 2-year span post that. But had to take the call of literally cutting off revenue streams. Like I think we cut down 40 to 50% of our revenue in that call that we took, but we scaled, we grew, I would say, about 35-40% within 2 years. So that's the scale we went to.
Very, very interesting. A lot of these calls seem very in the moment, intuitive, without complicating and thinking about downside, right? A lot of it can be, okay, did you think it was risky? Did you, overthink it? Did you think of doing something else? Did you think of building product? Because at the time, many startups were coming up. But do you think that's been a constant theme also, where you don't complicate something and just go with the simplistic, intuitive logic?
So we built a business like a business needs to be built, right? Are we making profits? Are we paying salaries? Do we have enough of a buffer if the numbers aren't hitting the mark? The reason why we chose to go with the brand one was a very simple piece, is that TV productions were large scale, would give us crores in budget every time we would do it, but they were famously stretched and inefficient in actual profitability. You might get a 3-4 crore project, but you might make 7%, 8%, sometimes 10% out of it after spending 9 months, 10 months on it. Which in the long term doesn't make sense, because you're just getting cash flow. And a lot of TV production, I think even till today, functions on cash flow. Then came the movie business, where, again, sporadic, right? Movie after movie, you're constantly pitching. And we had cases where whenever a movie flopped, suddenly people would stop taking calls and you wouldn't get paid. And the only business that would give us constant money was brands. So, okay, one second. It's almost like subscription, right? Your consistent money coming in. If we scale that up, it's more solid. It has a stronger foundation. We could upsell easier there. We also focused on brands which we knew we could go deep into. So can we go into Unilever with one project and eventually come out with, over the next couple of years, with 21 brands? I think 21, 24 brands at one point in time we were handling. Can we do the same thing for Diageo? Can we do the same thing for... So we chose brands that we could go deep into. Can we build larger mandates within them? So we saw that as an opportunity. And I feel between the three of us, the good part was, between Pooja, Rohit and I, is that we always had this scenario where sit down and we'd all come with different perspectives, but we'd come to a consensus. So Pooja had a very keen eye for what the numbers need to be like for this to be a solid business. Rohit would always look at, this is what's happening creatively right now, and this is how it could really evolve. And I've always been this, as I said, Entu Cutler, saying this is what's happening and this is what might happen tomorrow. And these are opportunities we can actually go after. And that combination really worked. I think that having people in leadership who can bring in different perspectives but agree that we'll come out of this room in agreement. Even if you there's this, I think Amazon says this and a few other companies, like you agree, you respectfully disagree, but you commit. There were many times there were calls we took which we all didn't agree with, but like we disagree, but I'm committing to it because the three of us have said this is something we're going to do. And that's what really helped. We also had 3 different people running 3 different focuses. So Rohit drove creative, I drove content production, Pooja drove the business. That also kind of helped because we had different angles on things. I mean, a great example is what we would do with Unilever, right? I think it's a great example of how you need to look at a business. Because I was production, I had a very strong relationship with procurement and their ad production teams. So constantly speak to them and talk about what more we could shoot for them, the capabilities we're building on that front. Pooja would have a similar thing with the brands and the category heads and what the brand side was doing. Yeah. Rose would come in with the creative and he would talk about this is what we could do creatively. So you're leveraging every single way in which you can really interact with the brand, and they see so much value coming towards. And our teams did that. Right? We grew teams who replaced each of us in those exact roles over time. So we didn't have to be there all the time. And it's very easy for a self-funded business to become a proprietor-run business, a founder-centered business. We never wanted to be that. We wanted to make ourselves replaceable in every scenario. And the more we did that, the more leaders we grew. And that's how we also scaled, because we couldn't be everywhere, but our teams could be.
Phenomenal. That's very, very sound, multiple business fundamentals that a lot of people can actually leverage, because, in single person agencies or, for like one founder led agencies, this often happens where the founder becomes the bottleneck when it comes to execution, sales, hiring, training. So much of the context is only you. But it's great that you mentioned so many important things that one can leverage. And I see a lot of long-term thinking. I don't know how intentional it was at the time, but it just feels like this just makes good sense in the long run. And which is what led to the acquisition, right? I'm sure 1,000 people have asked you this, if not more, as to how that happened. But you've often gone on record and said that you didn't know this was a possibility for a business like yours. It was never the expectation. It just feels like you also didn't work for that outcome. The idea was simply to do great work. Talk to us about what was the change in thought process from when you got offered this to when it happened, right? Because it was also a monumental call personally, and it feels like you're somebody who gets, of course, attached, and you gave your own heart to the entire company, right? So what was it like? How did you transform your sort of logical thinking, let it take over and be like, okay, this is best for the business?
So we've always believed in scale.
Okay.
And if you look at scale versus control, scale wins. And you just have to figure out how much control you want to let go of. So we didn't know it was a possibility. And we were, I don't know if it was because we didn't know about this side of things. We were like, okay, we're building a business. We'd continue to make money. We would continue to take salaries, increase salaries. And we're like, it's a business, right? You're running like a business. We didn't even have the thought of an exit. Also, I feel that this is a time, this is what, 2015, 2016, when we first started to have these conversations. The concept of startups, entrepreneur, exits, they were not popularly known things. And I think in the space we were at, we were playing in the media space, in the ad space. I also, weirdly enough, didn't know enough about the ad world, even though I'd been building an agency for so long, because we focused on the work. If you ask me at that point of time, who was you make me meet a famous ad man and say, okay, this is, someone who's done these ads, I don't know who that person was. And someone talking about an agency and legacy, I wouldn't know, because we succeeded because we didn't come from legacy. We did things because we knew that was the way things should be done rather than how they were always done. And that's what really worked for us. So the first time someone approached us, I remember this, he's kind of sat in, we were collaborating with another agency, a big one, and he kind of drew on a board and said, this is one unit in the agency, this is one more unit. And they were like, he drew us and said, we could be part of this. And we're like, ऐसे भी होता है. And then we went back and and again, like you go down rabbit holes, you research, okay, this is what happens. But we didn't want to do it at that time. This, I think, was 2013, 2014, the first time this happened. Then a couple of years later, then an investment banker came to us saying, well, there are a couple of agency networks who are interested in you. Are you open to a conversation? And we weren't sure, but thankfully by then we had an angel investor who'd been through the journey. So Roshan Abbas was our first, angel, and first actually only angel. And Roshan had been through the journey of building an agency and selling it to a network. And he sat down and said, guys, this is how it works. So you should have these conversations only if you're sure, and if you're sure for the right reasons. And also if your business is in a state to actually generate value. Because advertising acquisitions happen basis the profit you make. Mm-hmm. It's not basis revenue. It's fundamental. You get a multiple of your profit. That's at the simplest level, the equations get supremely complicated after that statement. But at the fundamental level, how much profit you make, a multiple of that is what you make. So then we got a financial consultant on, and we said, look, let's look at our books. Let's look at what is the value we could make. And we didn't have reporting, we didn't have an MIS. Those are terms we didn't even know existed. We look at a P&L sheet, and literally the whole point was, did we make profit? How much money are we making on each account? Is the account making sense? So we very, very basic, but I feel that that's what made it also work. Yeah. So we set those systems in place. We took, I think, a year and a half to really look at our books, build a reporting system, organize things around, prime ourselves for acquisition. Mm-hmm. And only then revisit some of those conversations. We then started to meet networks who wanted to acquire us. We also sat down and said, why do we want to be acquired? We had a few things which we knew we couldn't do by ourselves. We wanted to be global. We wanted to be global with companies we were working with. So with a lot of global conglomerates, the question always is, okay, we're giving you an India mandate. Can we also give you an APAC mandate? Can we give you a global mandate? Do you have a partner in the region? And it's tougher to find a partner in the region if you have to go set up an office. And this is also pre-COVID, right? You had to go physically set up an office, hire people, put them there. Could be very differently done in today's world. And so what we actually did was, okay, we have to go global. That's something we wanted to do because a lot of the brands we worked with were global brands. I would say a majority of our big clients were Unilever, Netflix, LinkedIn, Diageo. We would look at all of them and say, okay, how do we kind of go global with them? The second thing was, do we want to do this for life? And I think all of us didn't want to do just an agency in the long term. And how do we ensure that our team continues to grow and thrive and give them more prospects? And so that's why we did it. We said, okay, great. Then the third part is we'll all make personal money. Right, you do get a certain amount of money. You do generate personal wealth for yourself, and you're in your late 30s, and you look at the numbers you could make, and you're like, one second, this could be more money than I thought I could make. And then we said, how long will it take me to make that money if I continue to own the agency? Take much longer. World could change, which it actually did, because we sold the company in 2018 and COVID happened in 2020. And so we did those calculations and we chose accordingly. So we didn't choose legacy. We chose partners who we knew we could do each of these things with. We eventually sold to WPP. We had conversations with everybody else. And one of the reasons we sold WPP as well is we had a lot of synergies in terms of clients, in terms of why we wanted to do it. Spent 5 years within that ecosystem, grew as a company. We also had, I feel, through COVID as well, they were a great network to be a part of because, they kind of helped us as a part of the ecosystem to really move through many of the issues we would face, right? From everything from like how do you manage real estate to movement to all that stuff, and they gave us solidity on the back end, things which we didn't look at in terms of we were compliant, but were we deep enough in compliance? We look at legal the way it needs to be looked at. Some of those things which you ignore as a founder because it doesn't look like fun. But we got deep into it. So although we started talking to agencies to get acquired in 2016 odd, by the time we eventually sold, it was like Feb 2018. And then, 5 years through that ecosystem. And then in 2021, we finished vesting all our shares. And I think the three of us knew that we were ready for something else. And so we exited.
Lovely. No, I think that's as logical as it gets. And I love how thoughtful all of this has been. And the next part of your journey, before we get into that, is maybe if you had to summarize, like a lot of people today look at these solopreneurs or like businesses which are new age. The new age factory, in my opinion, is a service industry, right? And that's how you eventually get into it, because you don't need like large capital investment. Instead of like setting up a machine, you're setting up a resource, which is your time and your skill, and that's how you scale and become a agency of sorts. If you had to like quickly just like summarize the founder learnings in you and be like, okay, this is what really helped us get to a point where we would be sizable, we built an institution, and we were worthy enough for a large giant to also come and partner with us in a meaningful manner, what would those success attributes be as a founder?
So a few things. One is we focused on building leaders very differently. Okay. Most times what ends up happening is you do a cookie cutter approach of let's push up a couple of people up, hire a couple of people from outside, that's our leadership. But we would do a conscious attempt of saying who's right for what account, for what role, and for what they want as well in life. So our first planning director who would focus on strategy didn't come from that background, but she would be the person who would really kind of drive through every presentation we would do, every single pitch we would do. She was there and she kind of saw that through me. Like, she gets it. All we have to do is upskill her and give her, almost a support saying, we know you got this, let's push in that front. Our first creative director wasn't a trained advertising person. He'd come to us as his first job out of film school, and when he became an agency, he said, "Can I do that?" Because he had a genuine understanding of the beauty market and fashion and style, and he drove a large part of our growth in the personal care space, right? So the work we did with Lakme, with Tresemme, a bunch of those brands was because of what he brought to the table. Because he said, "We know you get what this is. We know you get how to do it. We just need to again give you the support to do it." So I feel for us it was like finding people from within who had the knack and had the inclination to learn and want to do deeper stuff in certain areas, and really give them the ability to go with it, saying, "We've got your back on that front." What that also led to was an understanding that leadership is not a small game. It's a scale game, in the sense that we would do this annual leadership catch up where we get all our leaders together, and one year we sat down, we were like 8 people. That's not large enough. By the next year we were 25 people, because the more you segment it, everybody feels like they have ownership, but also don't feel the pressure of too much on their plates. So the wider we went, and it obviously becomes more complicated in terms of structuring, but that I think in so many ways really drove success for us. How do you kind of give people ownership is not by giving them more and more and more, but sometimes you need to segment it down to a way that it really works. People focus on specific functions, specific accounts, and really go deep into that part. I think the third part is, and I mean, it's a bit of a hindsight scenario, but we always thought about what are the services that our clients might need next year, this year. And it didn't come from some deep insight. You just kept looking at what is the problem they might want to solve. So as e-com kind of as e-com kind of kept growing, we were like, one second, they will need A+ content. Which seems very basic today, But people didn't think about it. But what we went is we went one step further, saying 1 second, you need more A+ content for e-com. You don't get stock imagery, which apart from the global stuff you get. What if they want to shoot their own stock? But can we do that in a cost-efficient manner that they don't have to pay an arm and a leg and get a huge ad film shoot done and just get it done? So we built services that would solve a problem we saw coming for our clients. And the more we did that, the more things we could sell and more systems we could build for them. And that also made them value us as partners. And we also weren't greedy. So here's the thing, right? A service business, you can very easily become greedy because you say, oh, one thing, I can add a little bit more margin. It's okay, they won't notice this. But one of my longest standing relationships was with the video procurement lead at Unilever. And because I've spent years and calls on every single budget talking to him. And when he retired, he gave me a call. And he said he had called a few people who had relationships in the long term. And he just wanted to say that it's been great working with me and it's always enjoyed our interactions. You don't hear a procurement person says, I enjoyed interactions with you, right? And what he said, I feel really stuck with me. He said that you never ask for anything unreasonable and you would always listen to reason. So when you look at a budget saying, this doesn't make sense, I'm like, I agree with you, this doesn't make sense. Let's figure it out. But I would also one day say, like, sir, someplace I have to make money. He's like, I understand it. But it should be in a logical way. It shouldn't be random. So you have to look at anyone you're interacting with, even on the client side, could be anyone, and say, does it seem logical to you if you were in their seat? And once you look at it from that lens, you find solutions which were not there before. That call for me is something that stays with me because I feel I've had many procurement calls with other partners who might not have gone in the same way. But you do find people who understand reason and who look at you as a partner and not as a vendor. And how do you focus more and more about becoming a partner and take away that vendor mindset, which is very tough to do in today's world. But the more you kind of invest into that relationship, there's so much you can get out of it.
Wonderful, wonderful. As you keep answering each question, I just think that these are just these fundamental things we know should happen, but often get missed in practice because in the moment it just feels like you can take a shorter route to something or you can just do something in the wrong manner. It's not like as conscious, but it's just difficult to stick to that simplistic logic and just be true to that. But I love it. This is very, very helpful to anybody building a business, let alone like a agency, services, factory, venture backed. I don't know, just common knowledge that should be applicable and smart everywhere. One thing that I have as we bring this part to a close is, you've seen marketing also somewhat evolve over the years, right? And you've seen it from the lens that, okay, these are how larger conglomerates do it. But now that, you've seen the new economy, you understand distribution so well yourself. Talk to us about what, in your opinion, do these larger brands do vis-a-vis how is it changed and what these newer brands are trying to do?
So marketing said, I ran a podcast called Advertising is Dead. So, which a lot of people in the industry didn't like the fact that I called it that. I was like, guys, it's a joke. But anyway. So, marketing's been through this, I would say 2 to 3 shifts in the last, since the time maybe it's a little bit from the time I got into it. There was a time when advertising and marketing was a function which had a pace to it, which was a lot more right-brained, creative. Let's do like 1 or 2 great ad films in the year, do great print work. As much as people talk about Mad Men, I feel that was the vibe of it. If you meet old school ad people, they talk about times when things function that way. That you really spend time on copy and you spend time on nuances of things, and there's so much beauty to that. And then digital came in and kind of like, for lack of a more nuanced word, pooped on that party a little bit, right? Because suddenly you went from saying you have to do a few pieces a year to saying you might have to do 20, 30, 40, and then so on and so forth, number of assets. The places you would create those also increased. So if I think back on the time when we became an agency, the digital agency folks would not even be sitting on the table with the client. You were those people standing on the side. So your larger creative mainstream agency would be sitting there, you would have everybody else, and you'd be like, we're doing all of this, they'll do the social media post about it because it is a tick box for everyone to do. Where this shifted, and I'd say this is when the second shift really happened, is that it became a sales channel from just being a marketing channel. You could once you could sell through marketing, suddenly you were on that table because you were moving product. You didn't know if an ad film on television would make someone buy a product, but you knew if someone put up a digital asset and someone clicked on that button, went to an e-com site or your own site, and they bought the product. That just changed everything. It became so the right brainness became different because you were no longer just making creative, which connected with the consumer to build brand, but you're also building brand and also selling at the same time. And eventually, I mean, there is a lot of conversation about spending time on brand building and spending time on performance. They're not mutually exclusive. They have to work together. Brand building builds long-term connection and performance helps you sell in the short term. But it's not a either or, which is the problem with the way a lot of performance has. I mean, I'd say the biggest problem with performance marketing, and everyone cribs about it in the D2C space, because you haven't spent enough time on brand building. If you build enough of a brand connection with the consumer, that performance numbers also improve over time. The third shift, which I'm not a part of, but I look at it with a lot of curiosity and thought, is now, because what the AI shift in the last year has done is that we've become supremely left brain leaning now in the way creative is done for marketing. Marketing is now a technology business. We're not just a technology business, I'd say the foundational stack of AI is now across marketing. Because it takes away a lot of the problems we had with doing this at scale. Because the question always was, how can we create thousands of assets at scale? How do we create, different creatives for different people at scale? How do you make sure you can do this quicker, faster, cheaper, which is what you would always be asked to do? Although my production head used to keep telling, had a board on his desk which said that jaldi acha aur sasta, तीनों में से दो ही मांगना, तीन मांग के शर्मिंदा मत करना. Now I feel you can actually ask for that. You can get jaldi acha aur sasta all together because you have a toolkit that allows you to do that. You can deploy at scale. And so the same way how data was a creative director's best friend is what we used to say within Glitch. I feel understanding prompt engineering, understanding how that can really help a creative is really going to be what will drive marketing and advertising, because that's a way for you to realize dreams and visuals and creatives like you never could. You just have to unlearn, or rather not be resistant to a new form of creating, a new form of looking at a consumer and connecting with them. So I feel that that's what the big shift is, because the consumer today is less loyal because they have so many options. They're also, targeted so much. There's fatigue. Am I as excited to see a new ad anymore? I'm not. It's a part of my life I'm used to. It's on my YouTube pre-roll, it's on my feed, it's everywhere around me. So it doesn't hit me as much because my mind doesn't register it as an ad anymore. It's just another piece of content I can swipe through. So how do you stand out becomes far tougher to gauge in today's world. Whereas earlier you could easily interrupt and be an ad and you could get that leverage. So how do you get that aha? Or how do you get that consumer say, one second, this is okay, exciting, is far tougher to do. Which weirdly enough will take us back to square one, because the way to do it is to do it offline, to do it in person, to do it real world texture. So you might actually find out that the actual solution to this is that a lot of digital will happen, but it's the physical manifestation that will drive brand building. So I would say that's the interesting space marketing is in right now. So I'm supremely excited to look at it from the outside. It's tough to be inside the business right now. I speak to so many people in the business, and While the public facing voices might be supremely positive, they are almost like operational shifts that are happening as to how that happens.
Yeah.
And it is going to be in a bit of flux for the next few years, but I feel it'll make it more effective.
Sure. Wow. I love how clear your fundamentals are. I keep mentioning that, and I guess this is how it feels to be in one of the, be sitting across you as opposed to just listening to you, which I've done a lot of times. But let's get to that side of your life, right? Now, so we've covered glitch, and we want to get to what you're doing next. But before that comes this other interesting piece that you started along the way, which is podcasting. Looks like, we were discussing, you're generally curious about a bunch of things. Podcasting is this incredible way to just take that curiosity to the next level, genuinely fulfill your hunger, and in the process also hopefully benefit more people who are curious like you. But what was the spark for you to have started podcasting? Was it as nascent as I want to have conversations and we'll go ahead and do this? Or were you very logical about building distribution, building a personal brand, building an audience?
Initially, it wasn't about anything except it felt like a fun thing to do. Also, I started podcasting in 2018, around the time we sold. I'd gone to be a guest on a podcast. It was a pilot for a show called the Filter Coffee Podcast, and got done. And folks at IBM said, "Do you want to do a podcast?" I'm like, "What do I do a podcast about?" I don't even listen to podcasts. I think I was listening to one podcast which Adam Grant did at that time called Work Life. They said there's no podcast on advertising and marketing. 2018, no one's doing it. I'm like, I know I built an agency and sold it. I have no clue about the space beyond what I built. And we were like, why not do a show about that? So the reason the show was called Advertising is Dead was because how it was has died, and how it will evolve going forward will change. And so let me just do that. And it kind of brought me back to my roots of content creation, which is what I started off doing back in the day. So I was excited for it. Also, audio only medium, and you would know this, is a very liberating medium, right? You're not worried about cameras being around you. You're not worried about any of that stuff. You're just sitting with the mic and talking. And I would just keep doing it, and I would enjoy it week on week. I'd go to the studio, do the episodes. It also had an interesting ripple effect. I didn't think of what it would do to a business or personal brand. Again, personal brand, not even a term being used in 2018, right?
Right.
It got me two great indirect, additions in my life. One was the fact that talent started to look at glitch slightly differently, because they would hear a founder talk. Like, once this is how the founder talks, my business might be a certain way.
Right.
Clients looked at the business differently, because clients would come in as guests, and once you spend an hour talking to someone, the relationship is very different than if you're going to pitch to them.
Right.
So build stronger client relationships. It also expanded my understanding of not just advertising, marketing, but business as well. The creator economy was nascent. So I would meet creators. I've always loved to talk to artists and creative folks. So I would continue to do that. And that show became a thing I would do every week and not stop doing it, because I just enjoyed it too much. So wherever I would be, if I was going on holiday, I would bank a few episodes and go, and that kept happening. And then COVID happened, and I thankfully had a mic I had bought to practice at home. Because what I always do is, no matter what I do, I spend time in practicing the craft. So I would sit and practice in front of the mic at home and figure a way to speak, in a slightly more slower manner. And normally I'm a faster talker. So how can I slow my pace down? How can I ask questions better and everything else? And because I had the mic at home, the shift to online recording happened instantly, because I just had to plug the mic in and do it. And I continued to do that through the pandemic. But as I was doing that, I also started to get excited about all this other stuff I could do around it. It gave me a deeper understanding of business, gave me a deeper understanding of the spaces that excited me, which also led to me eventually exiting glitch as well, because I suddenly saw there were so many more things I could explore. And I think that's the opportunity you get with content creation today. It's not just distribution you get online, it's distribution, network effects you get out offline. Because you're suddenly speaking to so many people, so many founders, artists, etc., that the connection is different. And that, I feel, is one of the best points of leverage you can have in today's world. And so I kept doing that. And I did about 200 episodes of Advertising is Dead by the end of it. Started creating content other places as well. I would say between Take a Pause, which is the only podcast I do now, Think Fast with Suchita, I did in between, we did close to 100. So I'd say from 2018 to now, about 700 odd episodes of podcasts. So
That's crazy.
I can take veteran status with that number.
100%.
But it's just been that. I enjoy talking to people, like I said earlier. Just became a way to meet and talk to more and more and more people and dig into topics which I found interesting. And it also then made me put on my marketer hat and my entrepreneur hat and say, what more can I do? So Instagram content for me started as a way to promote the audio podcast, but it became a life to itself and started to condense content down into 30 seconds and 60 seconds now. And I started to enjoy that because it helps me learn how to take broader content and make it into one concise, dense package. Start to understand YouTube and the data set there. So there's so much learning in being a creator today for any entrepreneur, because you understand distribution, you understand how to look at consumer data, you understand what you might want to build tomorrow. I mean, every decision I've taken on what to build has come from my insight from being on the creator side and understanding the audience today. Be it as an entrepreneur, be it as an investor, be it anything, it's just that you can see what people are resonating with.
Yeah.
It's why everybody should create content. Which I think everybody is already creating content, but everybody should create serious content.
Yeah, I often say this as well. Everybody should start a podcast at some point. And in fact, that's what I want to ask, right? Like, let's continue that last trail for a bit. But a lot of your learnings, you've given a TEDx talk around communication. You've spoken a lot about listening. You've spoken a lot about, just being intentional with what you say. Talk to us about what are the non-obvious benefits of podcasting, right? I'm not talking about how many followers, how many people benefited from the content, just as a person, what it did to you and how it was like transformational, because I know it's been transformational for me to such a degree.
Yeah.
So if you could just help us grasp that.
I'm a more confident speaker today than I ever was because I've been doing this long enough. I was never confident on stage. As much as I like to talk to people, there's always that hesitation. I feel I'm less hesitant today, and I feel for anyone, the more time you spend in front of this mic, it just becomes easier to have a conversation. Because you need to do that in any profession, right? You need to be in a meeting, you need to make a presentation. So that has been one of the best things I've learned. The second thing is it teaches you to be open to other people's thought process. Because we tend to stick to our own notions of things, our own points of view. If you are someone who's doing podcasting long enough, it teaches you to look at someone and say, I want to understand your point of view. I want to understand where you're coming from, what your learnings are. You can only do that if you're open to learning, because otherwise it'll show. Otherwise it'll seem like an interview because you put a set of questions down there and you ask those questions and you've gone. But a podcast is a conversation. And a conversation only happens if you're sharing things and you're sharing learnings. And for me, it's been that I'm just so much more open to understanding other people's learnings and other people's lives. And I think if I had to, I don't know why I'm doing lists of threes, but I'm thinking I had to pick one more. You also learn to push yourself out of your comfort zone. So I've never been confident on camera till the day I sat in front of a phone and said, I will talk to this camera. I have also sat down and written a book by virtue of me just generally saying I will sit down and write a book. I got an opportunity to write a book because I had a Substack, which I started to write because I just wanted to start writing for the heck of it. And also because I had distribution, because I had a podcast, I had a following, I also had the background. So you have credibility, then you have distribution, and then you have the hunger to keep trying stuff. You learn that hunger from being a creator, learn that hunger from being a podcaster, because you're always trying to figure how you evolve your craft and evolve your content and learn from the world around you. And that's it's something you can only do if you're constantly doing it. You can't suddenly wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to be, I'm going to get all these learnings by just, talking to someone once. If you do that again, it just becomes so ingrained in who you are that, except the problem is half my friends are like, can you not make us hanging out into a podcast? which I'm sure you get as well.
Yeah.
Like I get stopped. Like, this is not your
This is
podcast.
not a
There are no mics here. Stop it. So I'm like, okay, fine. Then I'm like, fine. I get the point. I'll stop doing it. But or as my daughter calls it, someone asked her, "What does your papa do?" And she's like, "My papa does chatter." So I think that's the right way. Doing chatter all the time has also helped.
Wow, no, that's so helpful. I think I have a personal agenda here to also learn all of this from you. But taking it a step further, and this probably is repetitive for you, but for the audience, there's a great TEDx talk by you that I personally relate with so much, which is TEDx Micah. I think you spoke about conversations,
yeah.
right? I'd love if you can give us a brief snippet of the same right here as well. For context, I think just being a great conversationalist is just a 5x skill, right? Like, I mean, you can just distinctly say when you meet two different people, and if one has had a better conversation with you, they will leave a better mark. They will leave an impression that you will remember for longer. And it just shows. For me, that's been the biggest gift, right? Apart from the fact that the learnings are incredible, I just know how to pull off a conversation with anyone. So if you can perhaps talk about that for a bit.
So conversations are the most undervalued ways of medium of learning, right? And I remember I was making the notes for that talk, and I was like, what is something which I can share that's actionable? And if you look at your entire life, you spend a large amount of it having conversations, but you never taught how to have them. And because conversations aren't a tug of war, because we treat it like that, right? Imagine you're in a meeting, you said something, I will say something. It's like this weird sharing of like, okay, I want to one up you. But a true conversation is you actually spending time in listening, learning how to listen without judgment, not thinking about the fact that, oh, it's not about what I'm going to respond, it's about me understanding what you're saying. To learn that restraint and random plug, to take a pause and really think about it. And also then to turn around and say, how can I add to this instead of leading it towards a full stop or taking it away from what's being said? That only comes with being curious and with you actually learning either relevant or useless information that can actually add to that conversation. If you aren't filled with things to add, you're going to have the most bland conversations. But if you have things to add, you suddenly become more interesting. It's like every meeting you go to, there's that weird awkward phase in the beginning where we'll talk about the weather. It's like I think I remember during COVID, everyone's like, hope everyone's safe. I know you would have that chat. That's actually the part where you can really set the mood, right? If you know what, and I've spoken to people, and I remember I was talking to someone, and he was the head of a social platform for the region, and I noticed a painting behind him, right? I'm like, so do you enjoy art? And so his face light up, right? And he spoke about art for a bit before we started recording. It made that conversation so much better because I noticed something in his vicinity, because I was saying I'm open to seeing what this person might be into. There's a reason I ask a lot of my guests on the show about their childhood, because when you talk about your childhood, you talk about things you enjoy doing the most. You have to be able to not prod, but to really figure out. I think that's what we miss in conversations. We miss the fact that it's not about you. It's about what you're getting out of it. And I think the most underserved part of conversations is that you don't necessarily have to, I'm trying to figure out the best way to say it. It doesn't have to come back to you. It doesn't have to come back to what you want out of it. It has to come to what is the right conclusion.
True.
Which makes you look at any negotiation in a better way. It makes you look at every single interaction, be it in a relationship, be it, I've understood more about relationships in the last 5 years of being a podcaster than I did before that, and I was married, right? And I've just learned to listen a lot more. So you got to take those, and it's not necessarily from the talk, but in today's world, if you ask me, that's one of the most invaluable skills, because we're so resistant to listening. When I look at today's world, one of my biggest worries is we have a generation who have unfortunately been through a phase in COVID where they didn't have in-person social interaction for a few years. I think of someone in college through those 2 years and didn't have a college life, right? think of people in school. My daughter did her first 2 years of school online, which is nursery and junior kindergarten, right? And so it affects how you are socially. So you find it more comfortable to send a WhatsApp message than it is to say hi to someone, which is why quiet quitting happens, because you're worried to talk about a problem you're facing in a business, which is why people resign without telling someone they're working with why they are resigning. It'll all come down to a simple fact: how can you teach people to have conversations without feeling unsafe? That's what's really going to drive the workforce, going to drive innovation. And if we don't focus enough on that aspect, if we don't bring human beings to the center of things, you can only bring human beings to the center of how we work, is if we make them feel safe, make them feel like they can communicate, make them feel like they can talk to each other, because everything else is going to be taken care of by machines.
Yeah.
The only thing we will have left is conversations
And
what we bring to the table. And so that's what I constantly try to think about. One of my favorite things I did, I took to podcast mics last year to my daughter's class in school. And the teacher said, they asked parents, can you do an activity? So I was like, let me do this. Let me do a podcasting thing with the kids. And this is like senior kindergarten, right? So 2 mics, headphones, a laptop. I made them talk to each other on mics. It was the most fun experience to watch, because you suddenly saw these kids hear their own voice, but also, I said, just ask each other things. And I gave them a couple of questions maybe they could ask. But by the second or third person in this classroom, the first 2 were hesitant. By the third, they had seen someone doing it. The hesitation slowly went away, and suddenly they were all wanting to come and sit there. So you have to see other people do it. And I feel podcasting done that very important thing, that it makes people want to have more conversations, even if it's in front of a mic.
Yeah.
Which I feel it's crucial for the long term.
100%. I relate a lot with whatever you mentioned. It's just so crucial. And especially the fact that, we're not trained to have these conversations is just, I think, just a fundamental thing we all should. I figured this was this theory there. I think, I'm sure I've borrowed it from someplace, but speaking is an ability, but having conversations is a skill.
Yeah.
Hearing is an ability. Listening well is a skill. Similarly, there's so many things, by the way. I realized I mean, if I'm sitting across somebody at dinner who just eats well with good table manners, that's like a 2x, 3x experience for me.
100%.
And I realized we've never been taught that, because it's just something we assume to do. So eating food is like a ability, but eating well happens to be a skill. So no, I'm so glad we touched upon this. But coming back to the content loop, right? I mean, eventually it boils down to the fact that you're a content creator, which means that the benchmark for you, or the metric for success, happens to be the number of people that end up following you, right? Or that end up consuming your content. Now, that also means that you have to feed to an algorithm that just chases this dopamine hit, right? And knowing you from the amount I've researched, it just feels like that's not you. How do you make that trade-off as a creator? That's A, personally for you. And B, to all those who think of this as a viable career option, because it has become for right reason. What do you suggest to them when it comes to, just chasing this algorithm?
So it's been I would say for every creator, the big struggle is how do you not do what seems to be working? Because it's what you realize when you actually do what seems to be working, it might not work for you. So for me, I'm a person who likes to take my pace in the way I talk, want to share stuff which I feel will resonate with people. And it might mean that a lot of that might not be for a bigger audience. A lot of it might be for a smaller audience. So I always gauge this from a simple point, and it's weird that the algorithms eventually moved there, is that it's not about the likes you get, it's not about the views you get, it's about how people save and how people share. Because the people who take that moment to share or to save it, they know that they've gotten depth from a piece of content. This is short form, right? But what is also interesting is you also have to understand that not everything is black and white. So I would always find that short form content works really well is if you trigger someone in the first 3 seconds. Now, trigger is a heavy word, and you assume immediate trigger means something negative. But there are hard triggers and there are soft triggers. A hard trigger is saying that you will never be successful, and suddenly like, what do you mean? And you'll watch the video, right? A soft trigger is saying, do you know one of the main reasons that people aren't successful? It's the same thing. You're saying, it's like a do you know, have you ever, don't do this. It's, if you start it in a way that I'm providing value to you, then suddenly something like 1 second, it's still soft triggering me. I'll watch it. So that's been an evolution for me to not go hard, which is something I've always resisted. It's the same way with the pace of speaking. I've been told I speak very slow. It's a 0.5x voice. People watch stuff on 1.5, 2x. So can you talk faster so we can get to the 1.5, 2x? And I've tried it and it doesn't work for me. Because when I normally speak at that pace, a lot of the words I say aren't clear. And also you learn with conversations is that, and if you actually study communication, it's the gaps that give you weight. If you talk too quickly, people assume that you're trying to move through it quickly because you're nervous. When you actually pause, it shows that you're thoughtful. People use as, because you're trying to fill up space. It's a sign of nervousness, it's a sign of many of those things. Because you're worried about that silence that comes in between. Yeah. On the other front, on the creator angle, is also to look at how the platforms are evolving. What are they really focusing on? What are they really pushing out there, which can shift very quickly from platform to platform. I would say Instagram is the toughest one because I sometimes feel like they themselves haven't figured out what their platform is, which might very well be the case. YouTube is a far more exciting one to look at because it's the most robust platform. You know what you're going to YouTube for. It's a simple analogy, right? A YouTube short or a reel is when you are kind of swiping through like this. So no one's committing to it. Right. But if you push someone to move their phone horizontally from the vertical, which they normally hold, you're making them make a commitment. So long form content will always be important. It will always drive more value. But I feel short form content is not trivial either. Short form content it's almost like a promo for the longer piece. You might get like 5%, 10% conversion, but it's still conversion. And a lot of people will watch podcasts only in reels and shorts and not watch the full episode, right? We've all been guilty of that. But you got to look at each form for what it is, understand why it is there, why should you create on it? You don't have to be everywhere. Again, deeply under-leveraged platform is LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn, people look at it as a cut, copy, paste platform. My standard joke is you don't have to write about 3 things I learned from Virat Kohli's innings. But what is the value you can give that will help someone in their profession has far more weight than anything else in today's world because people want to be professionally successful. They want to grow, they want to build wealth, they want to do, find success. LinkedIn stops you from being trivial because it's a professional platform. So you have to look at every platform, study it, study what the platform's doing on it, and not just what you want to create. The trap you can very easily fall into, especially when your numbers grow. And I see this with a lot of younger creators, is that you're excited, right? You're excited about the fact that, oh my God, I'm getting millions of views on my videos. I'm suddenly on hoardings. I have people asking for my autographs. All amazing things for a 21 to 22-year-old, if not someone younger. But you have to think about, this might not last too long. What can I do that lasts? And short form doesn't last. Right? Long form lasts. What also lasts is what can you do with this? And a creator today can only do one of 2 things. You're either becoming a creator to become talent, which means you are, let's say, like a Prajakta, like a Bhuvan Bam, become actors, become showrunners, do that angle of things. Or you become an entrepreneur. You're building a business on top of the distribution you built. And I'm not saying you have to think about that from day one, but if you know who your audience is and who you're targeting, you will look at them from the lens of saying, what are the solutions they're looking for in their lives? And you can be the person to provide that beyond the content. You could just be doing courses and downloadable PDFs, which people are paying for, but that's a business to itself. I mean, anyone who's seen Variku's journey looks at how much that can scale, right? And you have to look at it from that lens. What is a long-term bet and not not driven by the algorithm, which is the toughest thing to not look at every day. Because I feel creator burnout is a big problem across the world, because you are always looking at how, why, and what do I do whenever something doesn't work.
Sure.
And it's happening constantly. Shefali Bhatt writes fabulously about the creator economy, right? I think she's one of the best journalists on focus on this space. And she and I were talking about this. The number of creators who have shot up in like late teens, early 20s, and then suddenly disappeared in 1-2 years. Just think of what that does to their mental makeup, right? How does that make them feel? You know, and because they've gotten that big rush, they've gotten everything, but how now they're struggling to get it back, and you'll do whatever you can to get it back. But if you think about it from the lens of what am I doing this for in the long term, because you can do YouTube in the long term, but what are you doing around it that can also be monetized, also be grown, give you stability, so you're not as worried with one episode that doesn't do well. It's like, look at Tim Ferriss. I mean, there's no one better to learn from than him. He still does it from his kitchen, and it's still as good.
Yeah, and that's great. I think very, very comprehensively shared. A lot to think about for a bunch of people who are looking at being a creator as a viable career option, and what to do alongside it if you've shot up, or if you end up taking it up. We were just before this briefly chatting about the process to maybe running a podcast, right? And I want to understand this from a creative lens, right? A podcast has multiple components, including what you want to talk about, the research that you need to do, the way you make the guests feel during the conversation, how you release it, right? Talk to us about some of the things where you've had some counterintuitive learnings, or where you've had to really build a process from scratch, and where you feel it is distinct for you and which becomes sort of your personality for the podcast.
I feel YouTube has changed podcasting in a very interesting way. If you look at an audio podcast platform, you tend to get in, you have a conversation, and then you put it up with edits. YouTube's made you almost look at it from a chapter point of view, where people consume podcasts basis the topics they see. They might not watch the whole thing, they'll watch the topics. I do that so often. I go to a podcast, look at the chapter, I want to listen to these things. So you look at the flow with that in mind. I remember early on in my podcasting journey, when I was doing just audio, I used to keep sitting on the retention graph, saying, where are my drops happening? And I would go back to the episode and say, why did a drop happen there? And I remember this is like 2019, and I was like, every time I spoke to a guest about a topic for more than 8 minutes, it would drop. So, okay, that's my threshold. So I would keep an eye on the clock, and at 7 minutes, I would start pivoting to another topic and maybe bring it back if I want to dig deeper. On video as well, right? You look at the smaller things. Does an introduction matter as much? Or does what holds attention without making it seem like it's holding attention? Like we've been testing one thing lately where let's not shoot a wide camera, let's shoot 2 close cameras. Does that hold more attention? Because when a wide shot comes, sometimes the attention drops. Like maybe that could be a reason. You look at the topics you choose. I think some of the bigger podcasters across YouTube do this, and I'm still not convinced, is that you start off a podcast thinking of what could become great short form content. So you go from, this will be great shorts, great clips, and let me make sure those are there. And then that eventually becomes a conversation. The pro of that is that you're very clear about the topics you want to center your conversation around. But the con is it takes away the organicness of the conversation, and sometimes you will say something and the guest will be like, why did you say this? And you later on realize that it was said because it becomes a great short, which the host has said. So I'm still on the fence with that. I do believe that choosing the topic smartly for what's relevant for today is important. But you shouldn't make it so much of a structured fit that it takes away the essence of the conversation.
I struggle with this a lot.
What is a good shot? What's a good clip?
Yeah. I mean, if you go in with that mindset, I think it just, at least for me, makes you lose the organic charm of being curious about things that you really want to learn, or the audience might want to learn, versus what the audience wants to game, right? Like you have to game the process. Then I'm not sure how organic that is.
Phil, also if you look at generally podcasting in general and content creation as well, the mic has become an interesting way to make things more relatable. I was watching a video, I think it was Ali Abdal who said this, right? Whenever he wants to make a video where he's just talking to camera, but he wants it to make it seem like he's just having a natural conversation with the audience, he puts a mic in front. So a YouTuber plays to the camera, you put a mic there, YouTuber suddenly talking to you through the mic, and they calm down. And people are yearning for calmer content as well, very often, because they get enough dopamine from short form. So long form, actually, I feel in the long term will end up being calmer, will become, I mean, if you go to the vastness of YouTube, you're finding amazing documentaries out there. You're seeing stuff that is against the norms of what is popular from, like, say, it's not spectacle like Mr. Beast. It's also not a Joe Rogan, but it is nuance. It might get like 1,000, 2,000 views, but for the audience they're catering to, that 1,000, 2,000 is still a lot.
Yeah.
And in the long term, it adds up. I mean, some of the best podcasts I know don't make massive numbers.
Yeah.
But I feel they have depth. And the depth they have leads to so much more. I mean, I know you and I both enjoy the Rich Roll podcast.
Yeah.
And I enjoy the Rich Roll podcast because he has such deep, nuanced conversations. Even his short forms have nuance to them. But I know the place he comes from because I've consumed his book. I have consumed so much of what he has put out there in the world. I'm like, you are resonating with a person and their entire philosophy in life. So no matter what you do and no matter what pace he goes at, you will still consume that content. You have a relationship for life.
100%.
And that is invaluable, which you can't actually get for a regular YouTuber. A podcaster can build that relationship, right? People are saying, I've listened to you for so long.
Yeah.
And just look at it from that lens and not at scale. It's not like I haven't tried to be a YouTuber. I've done Casey Neistat's course because I love Casey Neistat. I've tried to vlog, done all that stuff. Never ended up putting any of it out because I knew it wasn't great. I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I was doing it out of FOMO and not necessarily because I felt that's something I should do. This feels like to be the most natural way to do this.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think in the brief experience I've had, and I've only very recently started this broad audience sort of journey on video, I still feel that the strong followership you gain because of retaining your authentic self and bringing that forth on the podcast is just too valuable to leave behind because of numbers. But also, I mean, you'll be able to say it with more conviction because you've seen both sides now. And for me, it's just a very learning journey. So
a great example is, so David Perel is supremely popular on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Writes about writing and has great written work. David Perel has been trying to crack YouTube for years.
Okay.
He had a lot of content which him talking straight to camera. He now does a podcast called Rite of Passage. Very, very well produced visually, great guests, not so great numbers. He started to upload full length 1 hour episodes on Twitter, where his biggest audience lies. Getting massive views on Twitter compared to what he's getting on YouTube.
Oh, wow.
So you also sometimes realize that maybe your there are people who have Substack podcasts, people have private podcasts, and he runs his writing cohort for people who want to write online under Rite of Passage, which is generally massive in terms of the money it generates for him. It doesn't require massive in terms of audience. It doesn't require a big audience. It requires you to say, what is the platform that works for me? It might not work on YouTube. But I mean, it's like him getting like 5K views on YouTube and he's getting like 500K views on Twitter.
Oh, wow.
It's that big a difference. And it's just that he had to use the platform he had the most leverage on.
Very interesting. Lots to think about. But I think, again, very, very valuable. But this helps us close maybe the content sort of loop, right? Before we close, there's so many other topics, so maybe I'll be mindful when I choose. But the other bit of what you do is, the coaching aspect of things, which I really found to be interesting. I've seen, what you're recently trying to do. The new workshop is coming up. And it just like makes logical sense, it looks like, because you've been on the other side for a long amount of time. You're now building another company, so you have incredible empathy. But coaching is not very common phenomena, right? Or if it is, it's just so broken in terms of an experience, because it's not very, I don't know, quality, all of that is just not very standard. At least it looks like outside in.
Yeah.
Talk to us about what your thoughts on why coaching is important to begin with, how that plays a role in your life, and what have you learned over the course of time having done this?
So I've officially been coaching for I think 9 months to a year. I've been doing, I like to say I do it in stealth, because I don't talk about who I coach. I never ask for recommendations or any of that stuff. It happened naturally, simply the fact that you are a founder who's had an exit and built a business. People will reach out for multiple things. Some of the people I've coached came in through, the fact that they followed me on social media. Some of them came through the fact that they had heard of me through other founders, other entrepreneurs. And it started off as just want to pick your brain. And then it became one conversation and a second and a third. And at some point, I think the first person who I officially said I'm coaching became someone who was like, okay, we've been doing this now for a few calls. Should we just formalize this?
Yeah.
Formalize what? And so in some cases, it's more of an advisory. So I work with some companies where I'm like, one second, I know the problem you're facing because I've been through this. Let me give you the right questions to ask and the right frameworks to use. In many cases, it's an individual need, because what I feel a lot of founders do struggle with is to come down to why they're doing something before what. So the why and the how become more important than the what, right? And the what is very easy, because what you look at what everyone else is doing. And it's also about different stages in life. People who've had, let's say, an exit and want to build again. Someone who's a CXO at a later stage in their career saying, what do I do to find purpose at this stage in my life? So it's like I'm doing a podcast, but I'm doing it without a mic, without a camera, but I'm doing it in a way that I'm giving actual frameworks and actual tools to people. So it happened organically. I enjoy it a lot because I feel it's, again, you're adding value, seeing things evolve, you're seeing, people put things into an actionable state. And also my biggest learnings as an entrepreneur are things which I find sometimes aren't done enough of. Like, I'm a huge champion of operational efficiency, which I feel is the most under-focused part of many businesses, right? Because operations feels like a very boring thing, but to be operationally efficient and to be someone with clarity as to why you are doing something a certain way requires you to ask questions which you sometimes feel you don't have to ask. And as someone who's coaching or advising, you can ask those questions and make people really sit down and answer those for themselves, because you're not giving them answers, you're just giving them the right questions to ask. And so that's how it's really evolved. The reason I also moved towards workshops and will do courses and challenges in the future is, how do you do this at scale has been a question. So do I build a GPT version of me tomorrow, which I might possibly do, saying, okay, let me put everything I know onto one thing and people just get the answers there. How do I give people tools which they can use in their own careers, basis the stage where they're at? Because I can only coach a certain number of people, but that's not scalable for a majority. But if someone's a middle manager, someone's an early jobber, someone who's running a family business who doesn't have the access to do this, let me give you the tools and a way to put it into action. Sure. Is the reason why I've been putting it out there. And it's a toolkit. It's a lot of it is obvious, a lot to a founder, but I've realized more and more that what might seem obvious to you might not be for most people.
Yeah.
And the more you give it to them, you see genuine value, out there. And again, comes back to communication, comes back to what I like to call energy management. Because time management is a lie. Just manage your energy and you'll be fine. And it's also interesting because the coaching world has this weird reputation. I was hesitant to use the word coaching because it feels like there are too many coaches out there, but it's also such an unstructured business.
Yeah.
That no one's actually put structure. I think a great example of a structured coaching business globally is BetterUp. BetterUp's done a fabulous job building a robust business. But for me, coaching is a SaaS business.
Yeah.
Right. In the long term, it is a SaaS business. It is, as much as it is human, there is a foundation of SaaS there in terms of just like automated stuff.
Yeah.
So, but again, I think I do it more because I enjoy it. And sometimes it happens because I'm invested into a business. I'll also end up like coaching one of the founders. So it's a lot of things. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I think all of the things on coaching are just so important to iterate, because sometimes for founders it gets super lonely, and I think they need a sounding board, and part of the job is just intellectual honesty. And this is what I keep hearing. I've not had the pleasure, or I'm not burned through becoming a founder myself, but that's what I hear on a regular basis. And I think this is a huge service to whoever can take advantage of this.
It's a lonely journey, right? It's a journey where you're also trying to figure things out, and you have to be the solution provider, but you need a bouncing board. There's this fabulous book called The $1 Trillion Coach. If no one's read it, they should read it. It's Bill Campbell's book. It teaches you so much about what a coach needs to focus on. We see this also in sports, and why athletes need it. And at some point, you're like, once again, as a founder, you function like an athlete, be it physically, be it mentally, emotionally, and you need the tools to be able to navigate all of that stuff.
Sure. I think that's a very, very fitting sort of comparison or metaphor for that matter. What I want to understand further is, you're now building something extremely exciting, and that stems from having done one entire journey of being a founder, understanding a lot about what consumers want. It also is very personal to you, having now been a parent for a while. Talk to us about what the new company EMoMee does, where it stemmed from. Why would you start a company again, knowing how difficult it is from what I hear? What is the mission that you're working towards?
So EMoMee came from a very simple problem which Pooja and I saw. So Pooja, grew glitch along with me. We exited together. We married. We have 2 kids, and both of us saw a simple problem that we are over leveraged on IQ for kids, but we don't focus enough on EQ. And emotional intelligence is crucial to navigate the world in every aspect, right? You want to build the leaders of tomorrow. You want to build people who are in a workspace and show any form of empathy, people who can navigate, the basic instincts, right? It's like, how do you deal with anger? How do you deal with anxiety? How do you deal with, any form of tension? All the stuff which weirdly enough we are never taught in school, and it's assumed you will figure it out. And that's the reason you end up going to therapy later and struggling with so many things in our lives. How do you equip kids to be more emotionally intelligent so they can grow up to be far more well-rounded adults? That's a simple problem we started with, and we quickly realized that there were multiple problems to solve within that, and what it required was an ecosystem. It required an ecosystem because this is not something that can be taught like it's just taught in school, right? It's often taught through stories, it's taught through characters, it's taught in a nuanced way through situations. So what we're actually building out within EMoMee is this ecosystem of content, which is physical content and digital content. There is, a focus on working with schools on a direct basis to make this a part of their curriculum. How can we plug in every part of a child's learning process, which is relatable to them from things which they're actually going through in their lives? It's also relatable to parents, because parents are often struggling with, how do I help my kid deal with grief, for instance? How do I help them deal with the fact that, you have this kid who is having an overburst of emotion, which seems like an outburst because they don't know how to regulate it. How do you make it more common for them to be open to talk about these things and dealing with them and working with each other? So that's the problem we're trying to solve. We're not at launch yet. We're getting launched soon. Incredible set of, there's 4 of us building, the 4 co-founders. We have someone working on, behavioral and habit formation for kids, who's worked with children for a long time as a child development expert. We have solid operations and people leader as well. So between Pooja and me and Suraksha and Anna, I think what we have is 4 parents who want to solve the same problem. We're just doing it with different focuses within the organization. And why would I start again? saw a problem that needed to be solved. And I also feel that I have phenomenal co-founders who are so driven to build this. My job as a co-founder is actually the easiest one because I get to write the stories. I get to work on the content. Again, inherent things to me. I'm also a bit of a child in my head, so it helps. So I would say that I actually have the easier job amongst the three. But what they actually are building beyond just this aspect of what my focus area is I feel something that's really scalable, and it's a genuine need parents have, and we've seen this, right? We've done market studies, we've spoken to parents, we've seen that, and it's something we all miss learning. Like, why wasn't I taught that in school? It's literally this, right? How do I deal with this stuff? And hopefully make it a better space for people to work together and live together in the future. That's what we're working towards.
That's phenomenal. I think when you briefly told me before, I was also, I was very excited to know, because I was waiting for, one of the things I wanted to know when we met was what you're working on. And when you told me also, I just like instantly related to the fact that this is so important, right? I think everybody goes to their own maturing journey when you realize some of these things, but it doesn't have to be when you're an adult or when you are faced with adverse situations which make you realize some of these things, right? If it's taught internally in some shape or form where it can shape you to just deal with situations better through a higher EQ, I think that's the best service for a human, right? I often say that the best thing you can do for somebody is help them think for themselves. And part of this is exactly that. So very, very glad to hear this. And I'm so glad that you shared and looking forward to the launch intently. This has been very interesting, Varun, much more than what I thought in my head it'll be, because I've tried to replay this conversation in my head a bunch of times. Before we close, and I wish we didn't have to, but we will, I have a series of these abstract questions I like to ask, which is just to dive deeper into the personality of Varun. So for the next couple of minutes, we don't want to understand or, talk to the founder in you, talk to the creator in you. We just want to talk to the human. That is Varun, right? The first question I often ask there is to take the second person hat and be like, and I've often had people fumble on this, is that if your friends had to define you, what would they say?
Friends that define me, they would call me an Entu cutlet. That's what I've been called many times, because I'm constantly enthusiastic about the most random things which make no sense to people. My closest friends know that about me, so they're used to it. So that's what they would call me, because I'm constantly sharing stuff with them. I am the one person who shares memes all the time online. I'm also the person who will come up with the most random facts and get deeply excited about it, which makes again, like why are you excited about this right now? But that's always been me. And I think my closest friends all enjoy that, or rather at least tolerate that. So I think that's why they're okay with it.
Got it. The tech term for that is curious. So we'll call you that. But everybody I think has this one superpower. What is yours? One.
I think my superpower is that I won't say, I would have said curious, but we already covered that one. So I'm thinking of a different word to put it. Curiosity is actually one of my superpowers, which is genuinely there. But I feel my superpower is I'm very secure by myself as an individual, right? It's very, when I say secure by myself, it's not like I don't get insecure. It's about the fact that I can be alone by myself, and that is not something that worries me. You enjoy time by yourself. It gives you a certain level of being able to be centered that nothing else can. And I actually enjoy my own company, which I think is the best thing you can ever have.
Wow, I love that. I think it's so crucial to mention that. I don't think you can understand the importance of it by just listening to it. It's just something you have to truly internalize. But I'm glad you mentioned it. Next, what's one thing that you're afraid of?
I'm actually afraid. I used to not be as afraid of many things. Actually, no, let me take a step back. I used to be very afraid of putting myself out there into the world. But I feel that I am very afraid of the bubble I've created for myself being disrupted. I've always wanted a family of a certain way. I wanted a life which is a certain way. And once you built it, the fear you have is any form of disruption within that. So that's my constant fear, is that I've built the life I always dreamt of. But I have that at 41. But I know I have a lot more to do and a lot more to go ahead in life towards. So that's the worry.
Got it. I think some of this can be more deep than just grasping it in a minute or two.
Yeah.
So hopefully many folks will get a chance to just reflect. There are moments in the conversation where I just want to do that and not talk. But then, but the next one is around family, right? Like part of what you mentioned here as well. And it's very evident. You're very vocal about it. You enjoy family time. You want to be a great dad. It shows. And you appreciate, you understand it. I'd love to understand what you think people in today's generation, because we use this very loosely, right? Where we've lost connection, we don't value family as much. I think for me, the tipping point was Sahil Bloom's graph, right? Of how we spend time with family and how we spend time with parents. Talk to us about what do you believe the world thinks, and then what your personal thought is and how you practice it.
So the world thinks it's about quantity, right? It's about quality. Your family doesn't want you to be around them all the time, but they want you to be there when it matters. They want you to be present when you're with them. Not something I succeeded in very often, because I'm that person who's thinking about 10 things. So sitting with family and sometimes I'm thinking about something else and I have to be reminded. But I feel family also reminds you of what's important. Like my daughter says, Papa, put your phone down. I'm like, when a 6-year-old told me to put my phone down, I'll put my phone down, right? It's just those things, they make you remember what's important. But I feel the most important thing, which most people don't get, is that building your life around family doesn't mean you are only centering your every minute around family. It means that you have an ecosystem that is central to you, and it's not just a solitary existence, because it grounds you, it gives you that, it gives you that depth inside, it centers you, it also makes you value the right things. I mean, for me, it's also my dogs are as important as my children, right? The fact that my dog can scratch me at 5:30 in the morning, asking me for fruit, I will wake up and give my dog fruit, because it just makes me feel nice. And that's something that's not quantifiable, right? It's just got the quality to it.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned it. The other thing you value is fitness. And that's something that, again, brings to that rounded life framework, perhaps, right? How important is it to you? I know there's a story to you realizing that, okay, it's not about being bulky, it's about really being fit. Talk to us about it.
I realized after I became a father that being fit for life is really important. When I say fit for life, is that, there are just fundamental things we all have to be able to do, right? We should be able to run, we should be able to lift, we should be able to jump. 3 basic things you should be able to do throughout life. So for me, it's like, can I lift my kids and walk around in any place, in Disneyland, in a party, anywhere else where they're taking them, without my arms getting tired? So I got to learn how to lift weight enough that I can do that. Can I run long distances? Because anybody with a kid will tell you that you run around a lot. Can I jump? Because you want to play with your kids. You want to be that person who's fit for what life requires you to do. I used to be a person who looked at the aesthetic a lot more. Now I look at the functionality of it. And once you look at the functionality of it, you realize the value you get from that. You realize the value of better sleep, better food, and also not taking that stuff too seriously as well. I don't call it a cheat meal. My coach has this great term. He says it's a treat meal, right? You get to treat yourself from time to time. You get to go on a holiday and eat whatever you want. But as long as in your head you know that you want to live a fit life, that you want to be able to go run because you enjoy it. I remember the last time we gone on a trip to London. I woke up, I feel, on the last morning before we were going to leave, or the day before that, and everybody was asleep, and I just felt like going for a run. So put on my shoes and I ran through the park for about 6 kilometers. It's one of my favorite experiences from that trip, because I just ran for fun and it was beautiful. It wasn't about pace, it wasn't about anything, but I also had the stamina to do those 6 kilometers and not come back and feel exhausted. So you got to build yourself to moments like that, or like carry your kid around Disneyland for hours and hours and hours and not let your shoulders or your lower back give away, comes from being able to do that. So focus on those aspects has been a learning for me, and I thankfully work with a coach who helps me focus on those exact points. And also enjoy it. Find something you enjoy. It doesn't have to be the gym. Could be a sport. But as long as you're taking care of those, because as you get older, you also realize there are enough creaks that come into the system. So you also have to learn how to stretch and understand why your neck is getting too tight at times and why your lower back hurts when you wake up in the morning. Your 40s really hit you hard when that happens. But you learn. So be curious about that as well. Be curious about why your body functions a certain way. Understand your own body. And so like I can go on about this, but it's just be curious about how to make your body fitter for what you want to do in life.
Sure. I think that's very valuable. And again, something that really truly needs to be practiced because there's enough and more gyan about fitness. But I think it's just one of the things which hopefully, I think coming from you can tip people off to perhaps practice at some point. One thing I'm curious to know, and much of what I've asked you through this conversation are things that are known knowns about you, right? How much can you share about your known unknowns, right? Like how much time do you think about things that you don't know? These are not things that you're curious about. These are just things that you are just unaware about. I'd love to know that side of things because, I will not have, context to that. But perhaps if the audience gets a flavor of it, that'll be interesting.
So things I don't know that I'm curious about?
Things that you know that you don't know.
Things I know that, okay. A couple of things I've been trying to fill in a few gaps in my own knowledge base. If I had to pick a few, one is I have wanted to for a while study psychology. I've been stuck, and this is procrastination, right? To study psychology with a slightly more economics focus, or do I move towards understanding it from just like a human functioning perspective? Because I have 3 areas of focus which I've grown to love as I've had more conversations, created more content, dug deeper into these aspects, that I want to understand behavioral economics a lot more. And I've found resources and I've read a lot about it, but I also sometimes feel like, do I want to actually get deeper and actually, there's something to, weirdly enough, for a person who's never academically inclined, I want to study it, right? I also have this deep focus on understanding wealth. And I feel it's interesting because your perception of wealth is very different from before you have it to after you have it. And after you have wealth, you look at it from understanding what are the different aspects of it beyond just the financial aspect of it. So something I'm deeply curious about and have learned a lot about and want to learn so much more about is to understand wealth by itself. Because I feel wealth is so much more than just money.
Yeah. Can we talk about that a bit further, right? I was anyway going to ask, because in the traditional sense of it, the glitch is a success, acquisition, there's wealth creation, right? Talk to us about what that does to you, right? Because you go from, I'm guessing you'd still be paid well because you were running it as a co-founder. So that was not a major problem, but still a lump sum cash out or, across years means a ton. What does that do to you?
It gives you stability beyond what you had imagined. I've said this story a few times. Actually, I don't know if I said it publicly, but I've said it privately a bunch of times. Is the first thing I did after the first big chunk of money hit my bank account is I took a screenshot and I went back to work. So you realize that money gives you stability, but doesn't change anything. Doesn't change what you do next. It makes you make choices about what is important to you and what you want to invest in. Like, do you want to travel well? You will travel well. Do you want to buy a house? I remember when I was talking about buying a house, my investment advisor, he said that buying a house is an emotional decision. It's not a financial decision. Because you're buying it to live in it, you're not buying it to invest into it. I thought that's such a valid piece of advice. Because everyone say, oh, invested in a house. I'm like, no, I just bought a house because I want to live in it, right? I don't intend to sell it. But what you also look at is that you look at it from the lens of saying, okay, this is not money for me to spend. This is money for me to ensure that it grows in the long term. And that was a very immediate reaction that I had. I've always been a person who's genuinely conservative in investing. I'm not a let's 100x this or 200x this kind of a person. I'm very like, can I sleep well at night? Knowing how I invested it is how I always looked at it. So I invested it that way. But my biggest learning was the fact that it doesn't change your life from a day to day. It just changes your life from just the stability it gives you. You can say, I'm going to take a bunch of months off and do a podcast, and you're not worried about money in the bank because it's making money by itself because of being invested. But you also need to learn, and this is a mistake many people make, but thankfully none of us did. You also have a tendency to do some really stupid expenses. I was asked this sometime back saying, what is the biggest splurge you did? And I was like, I think I bought a house, but I have thankfully no expensive splurgy tendencies, which I know a lot of people do. I'm not big on cars. My dream car was a Honda City. I bought that midway through my glitch journey, so I didn't necessarily aspire for that. So even when you upgrade far beyond that, it's always like, it's not a dream. It's like, it made sense to buy a slightly more luxurious car. But so I don't think it changed my life, but I think it made me look at wealth differently. It made me value the other aspects of wealth a lot more. Look at health, look at community, look at family, which are all forms of wealth. But it made me focus on them a lot more because I wasn't as worried about the financial. Because once you have financial wealth, then you start focusing on the others. When you don't have financial wealth, that is prime center and focus, and only then do you focus as much on the others. So I think that's the way I looked at it.
Got it. Fascinating. This has been super, super nice. I'm thinking of what would make a fitting end, and I don't think anything would. But let me do an experiment perhaps. If today, Varun, you could write to your 50-year-old self and you had to write a 2-minute letter, what would that say?
50-year-old self?
Yes.
Okay, I'm thinking 9 years from now, what am I going to talk about? If I read a letter to my 50-year-old self, I would say that when I started Glitch with Rohit in 2009, I had told myself I will retire at 45. And which means I would be 5 years overdue on that front. And my letter to myself would be, I hope you haven't decided to retire, because there's still lots of stuff to do. Because if you retire, then you might just be bored and you will not be happy. So I hope you haven't retired, and I hope you have you've been able to find more things to be curious about. And I think that's literally what I would write.
Awesome. I love the consistency. I know we mentioned we'll end here, but no, what I did think I missed out, and I personally want to also understand, is that you mentioned your learning philosophy in one of the podcasts. This was with Raj, right? This was screenshots. But I just want to understand that, considering as a founder, you've had to, multitask a bunch. As a podcaster, you've had to multitask a bunch. As somebody who's building a second company and running somewhat of a mini media house, you had to do a bunch of things. Talk to us about how do you ensure this framework of action, execution, and let's say reflection plus long-term thinking. So rather, let me simplify. There's execution, then there is reflection, and then there's big thinking, right? So usually 3 things that mostly founders end up doing. I'd make the same comparison for let's say a creator as well.
Yeah.
How in your framework do you manage these bits as a ending note to just understand and develop empathy for what it means to be you would be a great ending point.
So the way it took me time to understand what works for me as an individual. I've realized that there are periods of time in the day when I'm at my creative juices are at their perfect point, which I've also cultivated. So it's sometimes later in the evening, or it's early in the morning, and so I focus those periods of time in really kind of thinking of ideas, putting stuff down, etc. I work well with people who can take ownership and go with it. So I have thankfully found people like that to do that stuff. I don't over segment my day. I deal with my day in chunks. And that also helps you kind of do this well. Is saying there's a certain period of time. I break my day into chunks because I realize that's a good way to have focus and to do deep work. Because the more you shred your time, the less focus you have and you feel overwhelmed and everything else that comes with it. So I try to reduce the number of things I do on a daily basis. I just schedule them out for the long term. So I don't have to, like, I'll give you an example. I've been meaning to start working on my second book for 3 months now. I pushed it ahead a month and a month and a month because I was like, it cannot happen right now. I don't have the time or the mental bandwidth to do it. It doesn't have to happen now. Doesn't mean I won't do it. I will do it a month down the line. But what do I want to do right now is to work on the podcast, or I want to work on this workshop, or I want to work on EMoMee. And these are focuses. So I don't think any human being can have more than 2 to 3 focuses at a certain point of time.
Yeah.
And I always make sure that I'm not overloading those focuses because it takes away that. And I look at it as I use this term called slow hustle. I say slow hustle because you can do it in the long term, right? You don't have to look at it in the short term. It doesn't, just because you're not doing it today doesn't mean you can't do it 6 months down the line. You have time. You can figure it out and pace yourself. Like go marathons and sprint.
Yeah.
And the more you spread things out, you realize that you actually have. I mean, Steven Pressfield is one of my favorite people to just kind of hear talking about the process of writing. And he says that most people believe that life is short, but life is actually very long. We just waste a lot of time in it, right? And we waste a lot of time because we try to do too many things. But if you actually focus on a few things, do them well, you get far more done than trying to do too many things all the time.
So true.
It takes a lot of restraint, but once you can come to that point of putting those guardrails on yourself, its value is immense.
Sure. Yeah, I think once you'd mentioned in one of the chats that I think this is a borrowed quote, but the fastest way of getting somewhere is getting there slow.
Yeah.
and I loved it. I think it stayed with me since then. And it's one of the things I keep reminding myself if I have to.
Yeah.
So lovely. I think just to know the final bit of also slow hustle is very incredible. I've just had I must express that I've had a lot of joy in just consuming what you have done, how you bring yourself to every conversation, including this one. Your poise, your insights, your learnings, your knowledge, your curiosity, it all shows. And it's been such a huge privilege, if I might call it, to have hosted you. This was amazing, much more than I thought it'll be. Thank you so much for your insights.
And thank you so much. And I must tell you this, that this has to arguably be one of the best podcasts I have done as on the guest side. So fabulously done, and I enjoyed this a lot.
Thank you so much, Varun. It means a lot.